Third and final scrimmage of fall camp tomorrow. We are 8 days away from Texas Longhorns football, meaningful Texas Longhorns football. We discuss expectations for the third and final scrimmage tomorrow on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis and Lacey Butler, your hosts. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by Ultimate GM. Ultimate College Football Head Coach is a brand new mobile game that is completely free, has no ads, and 100% playable offline. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Begin your coaching legacy today. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, once again, third scrimmage expectations, what I expect to see tomorrow. But this time we're going to do it a little bit different. Talk about what I expect out of certain players, not necessarily units of the team, just certain players themselves. Players I think that need to show out in tomorrow's scrimmage. In the second segment, 11 Texas Longhorn players made the all-SEC coaches selection between the first team, second team, and third team. We discussed that in the second segment. And in the third segment, I know y'all got some NFL fantasy drafts coming up, right, this weekend and next weekend. Hopefully you're doing it after the preseason. But the top 5 Longhorn players you want on your fantasy team this season, I'm somewhat qualified to talk about it because I won my league last year. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, once again, we made it to Friday. Hope everybody has a great weekend. College football does start this weekend. Of course, it's week 0. So not a lot of marquee games. I think Florida State, Georgia Tech might be a decent game on Saturday night. But, for the most part, we're all waiting until August 31st where the big games kind of start. And, of course, the Texas Longhorns take the field for the first time in their championship, quest in 2024 against Colorado State and DKR. If you're watching on YouTube, the beautiful stadium behind me. So, like I said, we made it to Friday. Hope everybody has a good, safe weekend. You enjoy some football, whatever you're going to be watching this weekend. And we got about 8 days until the real show starts, right? We can see the Texas Longhorns on the field. Before we get to that, right, the Longhorns do have, I believe, another scheduled scrimmage tomorrow. And, I think that there's a few players that, going into the season 8 days away, really need to show out in this scrimmage tomorrow to kind of solidify their footing on this football team. Obviously, it's not the NFL and, you don't have to cut it down to 53. Like, nobody's going to get cut, right? But in terms of roles and responsibilities on this football team, in terms of solidifying a role this year, right, especially early on, I think that tomorrow's scrimmage can go a long way, right, and solidifying the 2 deep and, who's going to be a big factor for this football team and, who may be a year away from that. So, when we look at it, I want to start off with Arch Manning, right? I think I always start off with the quarterback position when it's relevant. It's the most important position on the field. And I think Arch Manning needs to have a strong scrimmage tomorrow. The reason I say that is because based on the first 2 scrimmages of fall camp, it doesn't seem like that's necessarily been the case. Now, it's not like, Quinn Ewers and Trey Owens have been lighting it up and, Arch Manning has been bad. I think overall the offense and the quarterbacks could have been better, in the first 2 scrimmages. But what we heard from the first scrimmage was that none of the quarterbacks looked really good. The defense definitely won the scrimmage and the quarterbacks didn't really start to come on until later in the scrimmage where the defense went primarily zone, right? Then we heard in the second scrimmage that Quinn Ewers led 1-against-1s, right? He led a touchdown drive in his first drive, and then Arch Manning came in against the 2s, the second team defense, and led them to a field goal, right? And they said that the quarterbacks were more sharper. The wide receivers were a little bit better in the second scrimmage, but they also said that Pikakowski's defense, they weren't blitzing as much as they normally do. They weren't running as many stunts on the defensive line as they normally do. So, it kind of feels like the defense in some form or fashion gave the offense a layup. But even then, when we did hear about the quarterbacks in the second scrimmage, it was specifically mentioned that Quinn Ewers and Trey Owens had a good day, right? We really didn't hear that Arch Manning lit it up in the first or second scrimmage. And we know, right, with Arch Manning being our backup quarterback, he's one of the most important players on the football team this year. We are always, at any point, 1 hit away from Arch Manning being our starter. Now, we expect him to play, a lot of football this year, but based on the previous 3 years, right, we would have to expect, and I'm going to knock on wood because obviously I don't want Quinn Ewers to get hurt, but we may have to expect Arch Manning to play some meaningful football this season, and you can't always choose who it's against, right? So, junior year of high school for Quinn Ewers, he missed time with the hernia. Then in 2022, he misses the last, part of the Alabama game, and then West Virginia and Texas Tech. And then last year he misses the last part of the Houston game, BYU and Kansas State. I believe those were the games that he missed last season. That's off the top of my head. So, like I said, Arch Manning may have to play some meaningful football this year based on the last 3 years of, Quinn Ewers' career as a starter. And we don't get to choose who those games are against. It could be that stretch of, Oklahoma, Georgia, and Vanderbilt. I hope not, but, it could be, right? Or, whatever game. So, like I said, Arch Manning is, one hit away from being our starting quarterback this year, and our season hinging on Arch Manning being able to come in and play at a high level for this Texas Longhorns football team. So I want to see him go into the season with some momentum, have a really strong scrimmage tomorrow, 8 days away from the season, 7 days away from the season at that point. Jonte Cook, number 2. He was our number 4 wide receiver last year. I know that it made sense for Steve Sarkisian to dip into the portal and get the wide receivers he did because of the lack of experience. You can't just assume that Jonte is going to take that next step. DeAndre Moore is going to take that next step. Ryan Niblett is going to take that next step. His job is to field the best possible football team, and I think he did a really good job of that, going out and getting proven guys like Silas Bolden, Matthew Golden, and Isaiah Bond, right? But when we looked at, Jonte Cook out of DeSoto, that's an NFL talent. I mean, just really smooth route runner, really athletic guy with great size, 6'1", 200 plus pounds, somebody that did a little bit of everything at DeSoto. And we kind of thought he was next up, right? And when you look at it in terms of what we've seen from the wide receiver rotations all offseason, seems like Isaiah Bond right now is kind of locked in on the outside. Silas Bolden, in a short amount of time since he's been on campus in May, he's been dominant. Seems like he's somewhat locked in on the outside. And then you're kind of choosing between Matthew Golden and DeAndre Moore in the slot. Now, all of our wide receivers can show versatility. I think that you could play Jonte Cook anywhere, right? So he could play on the outside or he could play in the slot. But right now, the wide receivers I've already mentioned, they seem like the preferred, guys at those spots, right? Then when you look at it, Steve Sarkisian has talked about, rotating more. Maybe we'll see some more, 4 receiver sets this year than we're used to seeing with Steve Sarkisian and this offense at the University of Texas. But to put Jonte Cook in the game, how often do you want to take a Silas Bolden or Isaiah Bond off the field? Because I think Jonte Cook and his skill set is better suited on the outside than the slot, even though he can move into the slot and make some plays. So, when you're talking about Jonte Cook, we expected him to be one of our premier wide receivers this year, especially what we lost last year in Jordan Whittington, Adonai Mitchell, and Xavier Worthy. And at least right now, that doesn't seem to be the case, right? A lot of the people behind the scenes say you're just always expecting a little bit more out of Jonte Cook because he has it in him, right? And so I want to see him have a strong scrimmage going into the season next week and kind of really solidify himself in this rotation, whatever it looks like. And of course, we'll find that out starting next week against Colorado State. Jared Gibson, another player I think needs to have a strong scrimmage. We saw last week that Trey Wisner and Jaden Blue went no contact. So I expect Jared Gibson to get the majority of the touches and the majority of the contact at the running back position. Now, we did just bring in Velton Gardner, right? And so when you lose Cedric Baxter, when you lose Christian Clark, then, there kind of opens up or kind of eliminates all the competition, I should say, for Jared Gibson at the running back position. But now you bring in a running back with over 1,000 career yards, over 200 carries, and Velton Gardner, who's definitely going to push Jared Gibson for that third spot. Also, when you look at it, we always utilize 3 running backs in this offense, right? We've seen that under Steve Sarkisian. So Jared Gibson is very important. In 2022, our running back 3/4 touched the ball 77 times, right? That was Jonathan Brooks and Keelan Robinson. In 2023, Jaden Blue, before the Jonathan Brooks injury, touched the ball 39 times, and Keelan Robinson got a total of 20 touches last year. So we can expect our running back 3, whether that's Velton Gardner or Jared Gibson, to touch the ball 60 plus times this year. And I think that's significant, right? And so Jared Gibson, want to see him have a strong scrimmage going into the season because, like I said, we're going to lean on him a lot this year. Maybe it's not as much as, Trey Wisner and Jaden Blue, of course, but I think 60 plus, 70 plus touches is, substantial, especially for a true freshman. And so Jared Gibson will be a big part of this offense. And I think if you're looking at, who's the best to give goal line carries, just in terms of his build, I mean, he looks like a 30-year-old man, right? He's probably best suited, for that compared to Trey Wisner and Jaden Blue. So he might have a defined role in the red zone as well. So I want to see him have a strong scrimmage going into the season. Cole Hudson, I'm bullish on him being our left guard. I think the floor is the same. I think, with Hayden Conner, we're going to have a really good offensive line. I think with Cole Hudson, we're going to have a really good offensive line. But I think the ceiling raises. I think this offensive line can take that next step with Cole Hudson at left guard rather than Hayden Conner. So I want to see him have a strong scrimmage. Maybe not by week 1 he takes over that position, but I think eventually he will be our starting left guard. And I want him to go into the season with some momentum. Sadir Mitchell, right? This is a player that was a top 200 recruit in the 2023 class. We eventually believed that he would be a big part of this defensive tackle rotation. And it kind of seems like he got recruited over a lot this offseason in the transfer portal. We know that Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton are your main 2 guys, right? And then behind them, you have Jermaine Lole. You have Tia Savea, you have Bill Norton, Alex January has really come on as a true freshman, just coming on campus in January, hence his name, Alex January, just coming on campus in January from Duncanville. We've heard a lot about Aaron Bryant. Now the reports have said that, Sadir Mitchell has slimmed down. I think he came into the spring at 372. 372. He's down now to about 350. A lot of people say he's moving a lot better, right? But I really want to see Sadir Mitchell because I think he has all the talent in the world as a part of this defensive tackle rotation. And right now, it seems like he's the 6th or 7th guy. I think he can still improve that standing if he continues to improve in this next scrimmage and then throughout, part of the season. Andrew Makuba is the last one. When we got Andrew Makuba, we thought that this was going to be a huge boost for us, right? Number 3 safety in the portal. At the time, I think he was number 1, right? But then Caleb Downs entered, and then one of the safeties from Texas A&M entered. So he ended up being number 3 overall in terms of the safety position, number 29 overall player, right? And, it didn't necessarily work out with Jalen Catalon, but we thought Andrew Makuba was kind of like, the opposite of that, right? We thought we were bringing in this steady player that was going to come in and solidify the safety position that wasn't great last year. And now, a week away from the season, essentially, it seems like Michael Taft and Derek Williams are your starters. And then in terms of behind them, I feel like I've heard more about Jelani McDonald, Warren Robertson, and players like that rather than Andrew Makuba, who was supposed to come in and solidify, this position. The most we've heard from Andrew Makuba is the comments he made about how Clemson held him back, right? So, I don't know what's going on with Andrew Makuba. I was really, bullish on him coming into the season. I still expect him to be a playmaker for us this year, but I want to see him have a strong scrimmage and, kind of solidify himself in that rotation. Even if he's the first one off the bench, we're going to need him for high-level play this year on the back end, and he's shown the ability to do it at Clemson on some of the best defenses in the country. So really want to see Andrew Makuba have a strong scrimmage tomorrow and kind of solidify himself somewhere in the 2 deep going into the Colorado State game. A quick word from our sponsors, and the coaches in the SEC gave the Texas Longhorns a ton of respect. 11 players on either the first, second, or third team. We discuss that next. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by Ultimate College Football Head Coach. Hey, Locked On Longhorns fans, I want to take a moment to give you a heads up on a brand new mobile game that I think you're going to love as much as I do, Ultimate College Football Head Coach. In this amazing game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. Can you imagine actually being the head coach of the Texas Longhorns, Steve Sarkisian, right from your mobile phone? From recruiting players and hiring coaching staff to overseeing training camps and handling school scholarships, you control every crucial detail of your program. It's all in your hands. Will you be able to handle the pressure? And here's what I really love about the game. You are responsible for calling offensive plays during the games. Your strategy will not only determine the success of your football season, but will shape the future and legacy of your program. And one of the best parts, Ultimate College Football Head Coach is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate College Football Head Coach. Begin your coaching legacy today. All right, so, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of love shown from the SEC coaches going into the season in terms of their all SEC selections. I mean, kind of had to, right? The Texas Longhorns football team has a ton of talent on it, but it's still cool to see, what the other coaches, as a consensus think about, the Texas Longhorns and the talent they have coming into the season. And, I firmly believe that the Texas Longhorns will be one of the last 2 teams standing in the conference when it's all said and done, being in the conference championship game. And it really doesn't matter who's there with us, right? I just know we're going to be in Atlanta at the end of the season. So when you look at it compared to the other teams in the conference, Texas was third in overall selections behind Georgia with 15, right? They had 15 out of 87 selections. Alabama had 14, and then Texas had 11, right? Excuse me, 10. So 45% of the all SEC coaches teams, right? First, second, and third, 45% came from just those three schools: Georgia, Alabama, and Texas, which is crazy. And if you add Ole Miss, then it goes over 50%, right? So that's why Georgia's number one. That's why Texas is number four. And that's why Alabama, who everybody thinks is going to fall off the face of the earth and go into a rebuild, is number five, right? Because all of those rosters are still really loaded going into the season. So when you look at it, like I said, 45% of the all SEC coaches teams comes from Georgia, Alabama, and Texas was third in the conference with 10 selections. When you look at it, two first-team players on this Texas Longhorns football team really can't argue. Kelvin Banks, arguably the best, tackle in the country. It's funny because Will Campbell from LSU is also on the first team, and I think they're going to go back and forth this season in terms of jockeying who's the number one tackle in college football and who will be ultimately the number one tackle selected in the draft. Kelvin Banks and then Will Campbell from LSU. I wish they got the opportunity to play each other this year. It's not on the schedule right now. Who knows? Maybe, we'll see LSU in Atlanta, and they'll get to play against each other then. But Kelvin Banks, first team, all SEC, no-brainer right there. One of the best players in college football, bar none. Then you look at it, Bert Auburn, right? A record-breaking kicker at the University of Texas, and he has the best hair in the business. First team, definitely don't disagree with that. He was really good for us last year, crucial in a lot of games, and I expect him to be even better this season for the Texas Longhorns. So Bert Auburn, first team, no argument with that. He definitely has the potential to be the best kicker in the SEC with Will Reichert moving on to the National Football League. Second team, Quinn Ewers behind Carson Beck. We'll see how this plays out throughout the course of the season. But everybody I've talked to, in the offseason, Pro Football Focus, just different analysts, they, pretty much consensus have, Carson Beck over Quinn Ewers, and I think the biggest thing is the consistency. Carson Beck is not flashy. He doesn't have, crazy, traits like a Trevor Lawrence or a Caleb Williams or an Andrew Luck, but he's just week in and week out consistent, right? And I think that's why Carson Beck, at least right now, gets the nod over Quinn Ewers, who, one day, looks amazing and then some days looks questionable, right? That's just been, kind of the story of Quinn Ewers and been somewhat of the knock on him, right? But we hope that can get ironed out this year and, we see the same Quinn Ewers week in and week out. But, right now he's second team behind Carson Beck. Like I said, we'll see how that plays out throughout the season, but I'm not mad at that right now. Second team, Isaiah Bond behind Luther Burden, who at one point was the number one overall player in the class, in his recruiting class, I believe 2022, and just a dominant player at Missouri thus far, in a very talented wide receiver corps. And then Trey Harris at Ole Miss, who had a really good season last year, really good rapport with Jackson Dart in Lane Kiffin's offense. And you expect that to take the next level this season with growth from both of those players. So Isaiah Bond, it makes sense for him to be second team behind Luther Burden and Trey Harris, who probably are the best two wide receivers in the SEC right now. Second team, Will Stone, our kickoff specialist behind Alex McPherson from Auburn. Look, congrats to both of them. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be an expert on, the kickoff specialist. I don't even know who Alex McPherson is. I just saw him on the list, but shout out Will Stone. Hopefully he can get up to that first team by the time it actually matters. Second team, Andrew Makuba. That's going to be interesting. It just depends on how much he's on the field. I can understand why he gets that respect as a 3-year starter from Clemson. But right now, based on everything we're hearing, I'm not sure if he'll be on the field enough to warrant a second team SEC, all SEC selection, with some really good DBs and some really good defense in this conference. But right now, Andrew Makuba, a preseason, second team all SEC, and I think the Texas Longhorns would love it, right? I mean, it would mean a ton for our secondary if Andrew Makuba brought, second team all SEC level play to the secondary this year. Right now, he's behind Billy Bowman from Oklahoma, who had a really strong season last year, especially towards the end of it, and then Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky, who Texas will face off against at home this season, one of the best safeties in the country. So Andrew Makuba listed as second team. Like I said, we'll have to see if he's on the field enough to warrant that selection, but that would be a big boost for the Texas Longhorns if he could bring that type of play. Second team, Jahdae Barron. I love this. We talked the other day on the show about how he never got a ton of love in the Big 12, right? I don't think he ever made a Big 12 team. So it's funny, going into the SEC, he gets, tabbed as a preseason all SEC second team member behind Malachi Starks and Malachi Moore potentially from Georgia and Alabama, respectively. And, Jahdae Barron's just a playmaker. It's going to be an adjustment. He's going to be playing on the outside more than he has in his career at the University of Texas. But like I said, he's a playmaker, and he just finds a way to be around the ball. And I still think they're going to find ways to get him around the line of scrimmage a lot and let him wreak havoc in the running game and blitz the quarterback as well. So definitely can see Jahdae Barron making at least one of the first 3 teams. The second team would be a huge boost to our secondary. Third team, Anthony Hill Jr. I want to complain about this. I want to be salty about this. I want to be like, they got us effed up. Anthony Hill is going to be first team by the end of the season. The linebacker position in the SEC, I guess it always is, right? You know what I'm saying? But the linebacker position in the SEC is absolutely loaded. When you look at the first team, Harold Perkins, Danny Stutzman Jr. from Oklahoma, and then Deontay Lawson from Alabama, right? Those are 3 marquee Coke bottle household names, right? You know what I'm saying? So, the first team is going to be tough to crack, right? Then you look at the second team, you got Debo Williams from South Carolina, Michael Williams from Georgia, and Samel Mondin Jr. from Georgia, right? Really good second team linebackers. And then you got Anthony Hill on that third team. So I would expect Anthony Hill to play at the level of a first team or second team all SEC player this year. But obviously, like I said, it's a very stacked position in the SEC. And so it makes sense right now, coming off his true freshman season where he was more of an off-ball linebacker and utility player, they have him tabbed as third team. But I think he'll produce first or second team all SEC level play this year. Remember, I said he's going to leave the 40 acres with an SEC Defensive Player of the Year before he leaves. May not be this year, but I think he'll emulate that type of play. I think we'll see something close to a 2022 Jalen Ford season, one of the best linebacker seasons we've ever seen at the 40 acres. And then third team, Malik Muhammad, right behind Jason Marshall, and then the cornerbacks I listed earlier, Jahdae Barron, Malachi Starks, Malachi Moore, and then another corner from Florida. I think Jason Marshall is the corner from Florida. Malik Muhammad is our number 1 corner, our shutdown corner. He's going to go against some of the best receivers in the conference this year, and he's going to be tabbed with, shutting them down. I think if this defense can play up to the level that we were accustomed to seeing them play in the big games, especially last year, if Malik Muhammad can go out there and shut down some of the best receivers in the conference, then he'll certainly be at least on one of the top 3 teams in the SEC, first, second, or third. Right now, he's third. I could see him being second team, maybe even sneaking up to that first team by the end of the season. So 10 all SEC selections by the coaches, just, more confirmation bias of how talented this team is. And, the ceiling for this football team could be the highest ceiling there is, champions of the NCAA, right? National champions in college football in the new 12-team playoff. A quick word from our sponsors. And we ended on a high note, right? A little fun note. The top 5 Longhorns you want on your fantasy team going into the NFL season this year. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns also brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And some of the best features of the Gametime app: priority Gametime picks, curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. All in pricing. Make sure you toggle this feature. Shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. We know how that can be on other ticketing platforms. Seat views, get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Gametime ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right. So, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be Matthew Berry or anything, but, the top 5 Longhorn fantasy players you want on your team this year. I did win my league last season, right? I'm the defending champ coming into the year. I only do 1 league a year. I only like to focus on one set of players, and I'm a commissioner. So there's, added responsibility. I'm going on year 5 in my league. By any means, that's the name of it. In case you cared, I know you don't, but, so yeah, I'm somewhat qualified. Like I said, I'm not Matthew Berry, but I am a defending champion, right? So the top 5 Longhorn fantasy players you want on your team this season, and hopefully you haven't drafted yet, right? Like by this time, you should know you don't draft until the end of the preseason. Like I said, I know some people are going to be drafting this weekend, and then some people are going to be drafting, next weekend. My draft is always the Sunday right before Labor Day. So this year is September 1st. But whenever you're drafting, Hopefully you watched this segment before. So obviously number one is a no-brainer, Bijan Robinson, right? You're going to need probably a top 4 pick to get him. But, Bijan Robinson this year had a great year last year, didn't have the year we expected, but still had a great year. Didn't feel like he was, utilized as much as he should have been under Arthur Smith. And they were giving a lot of his touches to Tyler Algier, especially around the goal line. So Bijan Robinson didn't have the touchdown potential you would hope for, in fantasy football. But this year, a new coach, a new offense, they're going to feature Bijan Robinson, right? And, he still has fresh legs, one of the best running backs in the National Football League, super shifty, can make anybody miss, can catch the ball, right? I think he's going to catch at least 70 balls this year. So that's going to be really good for you in PPR leagues. And he's probably going to rush for 1,200 plus yards, right? So he's going to be a top 5 running back, I think, in fantasy this season, without question. And the running back position is the most important position in fantasy. So, like I said, you're probably going to have a top 4 to 5 pick, depending on your league, to get Bijan Robinson. But if there's any Texas Longhorn player you want on your team, it's Bijan Robinson. He's certainly a league winner this year. Xavier Worthy, I have him at number 2. The reason I have him at number 2 right now is because he was drafted in the first round. I mean, he just perfectly fits that offense under Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes' skill set, right? They want to push the ball down the field, and who better to push the ball down the field to than, in terms of combine records, right? The fastest player in NFL history, right? And Xavier Worthy with that 4.21 40. Then when you look at it going into the season, Hollywood Brown is dealing with that shoulder injury, so he's expected to miss some time. I don't think Rashee Rice will get suspended this season, but even if he doesn't, right? You got Rashee Rice at number 1, Xavier Worthy at number 2, and then Travis Kelce, probably the number 1 overall pass catcher. But there's still going to be a ton of opportunity for Xavier Worthy in that offense, especially when we don't know when Hollywood Brown is going to come back. So Xavier Worthy has such big play potential. I mean, he could even have, 2-3 catches and still go over 100 yards with the way they're going to push the ball down the field. And I think he's going to end up in the end zone a lot. Xavier Worthy, probably the second player you want on your fantasy team this year, if you can get him from the 40 acres. Number 3, Jonathan Brooks. Now, this one is interesting because he's still injured right now. They've come out and said he's probably going to miss the first 3 to 4 weeks of the season. I would say 5 just to be safe, because he did tear his ACL in November last year. So we'll see. Maybe they want to be overly cautious with him. But when you look at that offense, I mean, I just don't have a ton of faith in Bryce Young right now. And I'm not sure that the coaching staff has a ton of faith in Bryce Young right now, especially to the point of where they're just going to let him air it out, right? I think they want to protect him a lot with the run game this year. And right now, when you look at the running backs they have, it's a reason that they drafted Jonathan Brooks in the second round, right? Miles Sanders is running back 2. I think Jonathan Brooks is better than him right now, and they're just waiting for him to get healthy, right? For him to be number 2 on the depth chart. Chuba Hubbard, number 1, great running back in college, shown flashes in the NFL. But I think Jonathan Brooks just brings another level of playmaking to the table. So when you look at where you're able to get Jonathan Brooks in your drafts, I mean, there's probably 20, 25 running backs going before him, right? But you could potentially get Jonathan Brooks, who could be a starter for the last 12, 13 games of the season, and you can get him in the 7th round or later, right? I mean, that's just amazing value. And obviously, if you're a Texas fan, you've seen Jonathan Brooks play. He's really, really good. So if he bounces back off that ACL injury and looks like the Jonathan Brooks we saw in college, that's one of the best value picks you can get in fantasy football this year. And that's why I have him at number 3, because you can get a starting running back in the 6th or 7th round or later. All you got to do is stash him on your bench for the first month of the season. Adonai Mitchell, number 4. The reason I put him at number 4 is because he's probably going to be, the second wide receiver behind Michael Pittman. He's looked really good. Also, with the Colts offense, Anthony Richardson's going to run a lot, and Jonathan Taylor's going to run a lot, right? And so, how many opportunities will Adonai Mitchell get? Still enough for me to put him number 4 on this list. And then when you look at it, the only reason I have him at number 4, I probably would put him a little bit higher, is because how much has Anthony Richardson developed as a quarterback, right? How much can you trust the Colts passing game this season? I think Adonai Mitchell may suffer a little bit from that. So I still think he's in prime position to get a lot of targets. The number 2 wide receiver still should probably get close to 100 targets this season, even in a run-first offense. But I don't trust the passing game a ton. That's why I have Adonai Mitchell down at number 4, but still should be a very viable option for you at wide receiver this year, even if it's a flex. And then Justin Tucker, number 5, right? It's not all about the skill positions. I won my league last year with Justin Tucker as the kicker, the most accurate kicker in NFL history, certified Hall of Famer. He's had was somewhat of a down year last year. Like I said, I was still able to win my league, but he was only 2 for 6 on 50-plus yard field goal attempts. That's 33%. That's not great, right? And we know all kickers, they kind of go through it at some point, right? They kind of fall off at some point. But I have faith in Justin Tucker, 1, because he came from the 40 acres, but 2, his track record of accuracy his entire career over the last 12 years has shown that he just knows how to put the ball through the hole, right? And so, like I said, 2 for 6 on 50-plus yard attempts last year. I expect him to bounce back this season. And then with John Harbaugh's special teams background, that offense, anytime they get over the 50, they're looking to put Justin Tucker in, right? He understands the importance of field goals. Now, he is aggressive. They do go forward on some fourth downs, but Justin Tucker gets a ton of field goal opportunities for that Baltimore Ravens team. And so, like I said, if he can bounce back on his accuracy, he's still going to be a top 2, top 3 kicker, and that could be the difference in some games. I literally won my semifinal matchup because Justin Tucker had 16 points that game, right? And that's what pushed me over the edge, right? So you need a strong kicker if you still have a kicker in your league, and what better kicker to get than Justin Tucker from the 40 acres on your fantasy team. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a blessed and safe weekend. College football is here, even if it's not the college football you want. All right, Hooker. Peace.